When our nation was founded in 1776, only 16 years later were the first explorers exploring Puget Sound. So the shipping and the exploration by ship was going on very quickly after we became a nation, and of course even before. The original residents were the Indian population, the Salish tribal nations that were here. The first British explorers came here in 1792. Captain George Vancouver and Lieutenant Peter Puget, for whom Puget Sound is named. So it was a very important area for settlement, for trade, and for the establishment of forts for trading by the British and the Hudson Bay Company. In the late 1800s and mid-1800s, we became the offshoot of the gold rush in California in 1849. Many of the activities that happened here and in Seattle and in Tacoma and the Sound were basically spin-offs from the gold rush of 1849. So a lot of the shipping, a lot of the ships that came from the Atlantic coast to the Pacific coast to bring gold miners and the people who are going to find their fortunes eventually came north with cargoes from here. Then we had another gold rush in Alaska in 1897. So another influx of people came to the Puget Sound area in the Pacific Northwest and helped Washington State to grow and become the great port nation and maritime state that it is today for Pacific Rim cargo activities and other kinds of maritime commerce. I think one of the most interesting things is the transition between the age of sail with the sailing ships to the age of steam and then diesel-powered or petroleum-powered ships. And that is a very important transition. It happened very rapidly. We had sailing ships for decades and years and years. And then in the late 1800s, with the advent of the steamship, that transition became very rapid. Once the steam engines became more powerful and smaller, it was a major trend that happened very, very rapidly. In fact, one of the first steamships to come to the Puget Sound area was the steamship Beaver. It was owned by the Hudson Bay Company, so it was a British vessel. And the interesting fact of that is that the only way to get that ship here was not to use its steam engine, but to use its sails. So it sailed here from England around Cape Horn to the Puget Sound area. That's about a 16,000-mile voyage. But once it got here, the engine was hooked up, the paddle wheels attached to the sides of the vessel, and it then was used to supply the various forts operated by the Hudson Bay Company throughout Puget Sound. So in 1836, when it started and came here, that was the first steamboat, and it just caused a revolution, and as I said, the transition to steam became very rapidly after the advent of the Beaver. The original ships, the first one, the Orbit that came to Olympia, was probably only 60 feet long, and the ships grew in nature. The big sailing ships were 150 feet long, and then we got into the steamships, which became 250 feet long. Today, the container ships that come to Seattle and Tacoma and the other ports in the Puget Sound area some are 800 and 900 feet long and carry 20,000 containers. So the amount of cargo has changed, the size of the ships has changed, and the maritime economy is a big part of the Pacific Northwest. The first maritime history of the Pacific Northwest was written in 1892. And then no further work was done until 1965. So I wanted a book which would be more a brief overview of the history So I wrote a shorter, smaller book, a pictorial history, that I thought that more people would have access to, more people would read, and therefore the important maritime history of the region would be more fully valued and reach many, many more people.